Adrian, I got a life-threatening question to ask you here.
The life
Life
threatening.
endangering. I don't know what the true term should be.
Okay.
Is a hot dog a sandwich?
Yes.
See, I don't think so. But
Why?
there are people all over the world that would probably disagree or agree from various different cultures. And would you look at that? It's what we're talking about today. All around the world in different cultures. See how I did that there? I
I
just
almost got whiplash from that transition.
wow. I mean, but hey, it's probably better than what a lot of the people in these movies faced. So, welcome back to the Drive Back Podcast. My name is Garrett,
And I'm Adrian.
and today we've got a back-to-back, which is what, Adrian?
Back to back is where there are two movies that are typically of like a reiteration of each other. So usually it's like an older one and then a newer reboot of the franchise or a newer take on the film. And we watch them back to back. But it can also be a sequel. That's not the case for this one, but that's basically the idea of the episode.
That's absolutely right. And today we have two movies. That one is a remake of an original, the original being an adaptation of a classic literary novel. So let's go ahead and dive right in. We're covering both Around the World in 80 Days films, one from the 1950s and one from the early 2000s.
Yep.
That being said, let's just go ahead and jump right in because I'm ready to talk about it. The both films are available to watch in various places. The original from 1956 is available to stream on Amazon Prime if you rent it. So you do have to rent it for that price. It was super cheap. It was on sale though when I rented it. It was like $2. So
Yeah, same.
pretty worth it, I would say. For $2. You know, there's a lot worse movies out there.
Yeah.
But the remake is a Disney film, so it is on Disney Plus. So you can watch it there, which is pretty awesome.
It's a bummer. I also paid for that one.
Oh, they made you pay for the rental? Oh, wow, all right. I didn't know it was a premiere Disney Plus release like Mulan.
No, I didn't watch it on Disney Plus. I watched it on Amazon Prime.
Oh,
That's what I'm saying.
Oh no!
I wish I'd known.
Well, I guess I should update our Google Docs that show where everything is. But let's go ahead and talk about the first film, which is shocker, Around the World in 80 Days. Released in 1956, it was directed by Michael Anderson and stars David Niven, Kenton Floss, and Finlay Curry. A Victorian Englishman bets that with the new ships and railways, he can circumnavigate the globe in 80 days. It was nominated for 3 Oscars, including Best Director, Best Art Direction, and Best Costume Design, and went on to win 5 Oscars for Best Film Editing, Best Cinematography for a Color Film, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Picture as well. I also forgot Best Score as well. So this is a
Wow.
Best Picture winner, which I'll go first because
Okay.
I feel like I always make you go first
Okay.
in a lot of these. I don't know how this got Best Picture. I mean,
Yeah,
when
agreed.
I look at the time and I look at the other films that were nominated that year, I can see why maybe it would have won.
Just no competition.
There may not have been that good a competition. I honestly am forgetting the movies off the top of my head. There was one that I feel probably would have been a better choice, but that being said, this movie is very long and
Yeah.
not in like the Lawrence of Arabia way where it's just you're glued to the screen for that whole time, or Lord of the Rings for me at least. You know, like I felt like I checked my phone more often during this movie than anything else because I feel like if I pulled out my phone and was just looking at a couple different things, like I was browsing Reddit to see what people thought of this movie or whatever it may have been, if I was on my phone for 15 minutes, I don't feel like I would have missed anything.
Yeah, that's my biggest complaint about the movie is that it's absolutely atrociously slow.
Yes.
And my whole stance is I can see why it won Best Picture because at the time the scope of the movie was pretty large. It was pretty cool. It's an all-encompassing thing.
Yeah.
Like huge movie. But yeah, the pacing, like it does not need to be that long. This movie would be great. It could probably lose an hour, to be honest. And I think I would get a better experience out of it.
Yeah, I definitely think that it definitely could have been trimmed down. I'm trying to figure out like in the back of my head where I would have trimmed, and maybe just sequences that went on a little too long.
The train ride.
The train
that was
ride.
like
The
like half an hour for like 2 sentences.
when they set off in the air balloon, like that when they're just going towards the
Yeah.
Alps, there was like 15 minutes of like, oh look, oh, and they're not even like 500 miles past England at that point.
Yeah,
Um,
stuff like that is definitely could be cut. Yeah, okay, go ahead. I'll tack on to your complaints.
but I was gonna say before we do that though, first thing, I had never seen this movie before. Had you?
No, I had seen the newer one.
Okay, I hadn't seen either of them. So
Okay.
color me very confused that they didn't use the fucking air balloon the whole goddamn time,
Yeah.
because it's all over the marketing for everything.
Yeah.
But that being said, I went in with completely fresh eyes to this. But we also want to drop a spoiler warning for these films. We'll just do a general spoiler warning here because a lot of the story beats in both are the same because it is based off the same Jules Verne novel. However, I'll say the newer version has some things about it that are different. So just overall spoiler warning. We'll give one at the beginning here if you haven't seen either of them. So with this one, I do want to point out a couple of things that I do think are really good about this movie. The production design is very good. There is something to be said about the production design and set design and costume design of the 50s. It's very strong.
It feels very large, too. Like, the movie feels like it's big. It's really cool.
It honestly, it's very weird to say this, but I feel like with this original one, that the way that the sets were designed, the way that everything looked, I feel like it could have taken place at the same time in the same place as Mary Poppins.
Sure. Yeah,
And,
I buy it.
like, maybe just because it's that Victorian style of the 50s and 60s that people tended to go towards. Maybe it was the same art direction. I don't know. I didn't research that ahead of time because I just had this thought. But like the technicality of the time is very impressive, and I think that does hold over till today. It's just everything else just kind of falls flat. I mean, the main actor David Niven, very boring.
I did want to chime in before we get into like the negatives of the acting. I did feel like there was some really neat cinematography.
Yeah.
Like there was some really cool shots that they did. Like the one in particular that jumps out to me that I really kind of jarred me is the one that's attached to the back of the bike that he's riding around on. And then I just feel like there were really neat, like, establishing shots that did it. Like even the one you're talking about of the hot air balloon like floating, like whoever was behind the camera knew that what they were doing. Like I can see why it was visually so appealing then.
Yeah.
It just really loses it in the pacing and the acting.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's one specific shot towards the beginning of the movie. It's not anything revolutionary, but it's this old Victorian-style house in England, and then it cuts to, like, the overhead shots of it. And quickly in my head, I was kind of like, if I ever get enough money, I want one of those houses, because that just looks super awesome. Even though I'm, like, a modern design nut, like, if my house isn't just a cube, it's weird. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump into some of the criticisms, though. I think the criticism, like, not that this movie is necessarily bad. I wouldn't say it's a bad movie. It just has a lot that weighs it down. Primarily, David Niven as our main character, Phineas Fogg, I believe his name is, not interesting at all.
Yeah, no, I don't think he breathes any life into the character. I'm not sure what direction he got or like what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
But it just none of it hits.
It really doesn't. I mean, I can barely remember anything he did because it's this stoic British Victorian. And, look at the natives, they're so droll. Like it's just kind of pathetic. Cantinflas, though, on the other hand, is probably one of the better parts of the movie. Because of the energy.
I did want to point out for Fogg, though, in the latter movie, at least that scientific mindset plays into the character and who they are. In this one, it's just like ultra flat. Like it's for no reason.
Yeah, and maybe it's just the actor, maybe it's just the time, maybe it's just the script wasn't amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, even though it did win an Oscar for adapted screenplay, but on the whole, it's a serviceable performance. It's not bad by any means. It's just very boring. I mean, and again, like I was saying, Cantinflas is great. His valet, a lot of fun to watch him. It looks like he's having the time of his life. I don't know what else he has done, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think that's also just a more fun role, though.
Oh,
Like, I think there's a
absolutely.
lot more going on with that role. When I feel like the direction for Fogg was, you are a serious scientist and that's it. And it was like everyone else seemed to get at least a
Well, he
little
wasn't
more
even a
direction.
scientist, right?
Well, yeah, just
Because
well, he was
he
part of the board.
no, it was just like a gentleman's club. The
Yeah, I thought they were
scientist
all
was in the
scientists.
scientist is in the newer one.
No, but I thought they were the thing of gentlemen. They were all scientists also. Maybe I just skipped over
Well,
that part.
maybe it was like one of them was a banker, and like he's like, oh, you mean like talking about the bank? How do you know so much about the heist? And he's like, well, anyone can get that off. It's they weren't all
I thought they were all.
scientists.
I definitely blurred those together. I thought that was another club of scientists.
It was kind of just like a rich white man's club. It was all
Well, then
that it
that
was.
actually that makes it even more boring. Why did he choose to be like such a boring gentleman? Like that makes
Yeah,
it even
like
worse.
I mean, hey, it's pretty on point, I guess, for the time, you know.
I guess.
But
Yeah, I definitely like spoil. I mean, this. I mean, I know we're past spoilers, but like this is a one-time watch for me, and then I will never need to watch it again.
it is one of those things, like, if you're studying the films of the time, like, if you're trying to go through the 50s, but also I would say, you know, like I am, like, in my spare time, I'm trying to go through every Best Picture winner ever. And so in that regard, I'm glad that I watched this movie. I'm very happy that I did. I wouldn't watch it again. And from all the Best Picture winners I've seen, it's probably one of the least deserving.
Yeah,
But that, I mean, it could have also just been a dry year. You know, I mean,
totally. But I think the way you can tell how the quality of this movie or like the staying power of it is a lot of the Best Picture movies throughout time still get referenced a lot in movie circles today.
yes,
They're just, and this one doesn't come up that much. I
yeah.
don't think anyone's like, well, you remember How to Around the World in 80 Days, of course. That movie
Oh,
was
yes, yes, yes,
incredible.
yes, yes. Of course. Around the world in 80 days. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's going to be very interesting though, and not to change topics off the course of it, but like, it's going to be interesting to see what today's Oscar winners are like in 30 years, 40 years. Like, I feel
Yeah.
like no one talks about the Green Book, and it won Best Picture. You know, I love The Artist. No one talks about The Artist unless people are like, oh, did silent films work in this day? You know, like, so it's
Yeah.
very interesting to see what's going to happen with that. But two things I did want to discuss about this movie, and I know Adrian uses this joke all the time, but this truly feels like the end game of 1950s movies because the cast is enormous.
Well, I did read a little bit that this was like where cameo shots like became a thing.
Like, yeah,
I
I could
did
see
read
that.
an article that like this was the first movie where other famous people were in it just for the sake of other famous people being in it.
Yeah.
And I give it credit for that. I think like it for parts of it it's nonstop like and there's another famous person and another one and now there's three. And
Yeah.
like it just kept going.
Yeah, and it's like at some points it's more noticeable than others. There's obviously actors of the time that were big that we don't know as well now. But
But you can kind of tell because the movie like almost does that like sitcom thing where it like lingers on
wink,
the shot.
wink.
Yeah, like it kind of holds you there for a second. You're like, that guy, something's up with
like
that
specifically the one that I think of is when they're in America and they're at the tavern or the saloon or whatever. And I've been playing way too much D&D. When they're at the saloon,
Tavern.
and the piano player, we see the back of his head quite a lot, and then it turns around. Oh boy, it's Frank Sinatra as a saloon piano guy. And then there was also a huge Western star that was in it. I forget his name. He was like
guy. I couldn't even count everybody.
one of the villain characters, I guess you could say. But there's also one thing I do want to touch upon with this movie. We kind of brought this up, something similar up with Lawrence of Arabia, not to connect it to a better film. But
God forbid.
the, there is a problem with representation in this movie.
Definitely.
Specifically the Native Americans. But that's not something that should impede on a score because it's not something that we can change. It's not something that we can do anything about. It was a product of its time. But also it doesn't need to be shoved under the rug. I think it still needs to be out there, and we need to learn what we can do better. Because I think that's the best way we'll move forward. And here it's pretty egregious. It's clearly some white guys they threw some paint on.
Yeah.
Like, hey Jim,
But
I know
we've
you're the
seen that.
stuntman intern. Let's go ahead and get you up on that horse. You know?
But we've seen that in other movies of this time.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's not something that we could change. Socially back then, I don't want to say it was acceptable, but it definitely wasn't flagged as much as it is now.
Yeah.
And so that's why it exists. But yeah, I definitely noticed it. I did want to talk about. So I don't know if you know this. Do you feel like there were a lot of set pieces in this movie, like stage set pieces?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, because I could not tell if they actually went to a lot of these countries or if they were just on sound stages for like 90% of the movie.
I'm sure they had like, a secondary location team. I do know that there is a credited director for this film. I want to double check this just to make sure. There is a credited director for this movie specifically for the Spain sequence.
Okay, so they did go to Spain.
I just wanted to double check. I don't know why I can't find it. I would just searched it on IMDb. I want to make sure I get their name out there because, they deserve credit as well. John Farrow is responsible for the Spanish sequences.
Oh, the producer of Iron Man.
That's John Favreau. Same person, I guess.
Same person.
He's like Keanu Reeves. He just, I'm the son of this person. But yeah, it's definitely set pieces. I do think there are location shots, like when they land in the Spanish village. That's either a set on Universal's backlot or BBC's backlot or something. But at least it feels like a real village. But then they go inside, and there's the big dancing sequence, and that's clearly a soundstage. But they want to show off the culture, which I understand. It definitely feels more real. I think we've gotten so used to like CG, and we've gotten so used to the volume now, even that we look at these and it's like, wow, like did they actually film on location? And it's just a set, but it's still done very well.
Yeah, and I think in this movie, I give it credit that like I couldn't tell at certain times whether they were actually on site or not. Yeah. So I thought that was pretty good, and whoever did the staging did a really good job too.
Exactly. But anything else you want to talk about with this movie? Because we do have another one to get to.
Let's do it.
Alrighty. Well, I did go first for this one. As far as final thoughts and a score goes, as far as Oscar winners go, this one is pretty weak. It has incredible elements that are all shoved into an overlong film, and it feels more like an exploration of interesting scenes and trying to bring cultures to life, as opposed to presenting just a coherent story. And because of that, I gave it a 56. I would say it's a one-time view. I can respect a lot of the work that goes into it. I wouldn't watch it again, and I don't think I would necessarily recommend it unless you're specifically looking for something of the time, or you're going like that Oscar winner kind of, like, I guess, binge.
Yeah, like if someone came up to me and they were like, hey, I'm really just looking for that one kind of in particular film where people travel around the world in like a set number of days, then I might recommend this movie. But otherwise, I would not.
Well, is that your final thought?
Yeah, I guess so. And with that, I gave this movie a 37.
Wow. All right. That's a pretty weighty difference in my favor that we haven't seen for a while.
That you reviewed higher than me?
Yeah. I feel like
I think there is a little bit of bias there, not from you, but just from a film community, that it is a winner. There is a lot, like, critically well known about this movie, so I think that lines up.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Moving on, the second film today is also around the world in 80 days. Shocker. It's a remake. Released in 2004. It was directed by Frank Carrassi and stars Steve Coogan, Jackie Chan, and Cecile de France. To win a bet, an eccentric British inventor, beside his Chinese valet and an aspiring French artist, embarks on a trip full of adventures and dangers around the world in exactly 80 days. So, what was the... you had seen this movie before. I had not. Mm-hmm. After rewatching it, what did you think about it?
Yeah, I guess without spoilers, there was a part at the end of the first act, where I forget the line, but it was like somewhere along the part of the painting, without saying any spoilers. And I just looked at Cassie and I went, "Wow, this movie's pretty bad." And that's without spoilers. that's my thoughts on that. I think it does a lot of things that make more sense for the story, like what Garrett just said with like the inventor aspect of it, and the actual like challenge portion makes a little bit more sense with a little more weight to it. Um, and I think the humor in this movie is a little more fun once it finds itself later in the movie. And I think, yeah, that's my opening thoughts.
Sure. I again, I hadn't seen this movie before. I went in, and at first, I was enjoying it. I thought it started off better. I thought that specifically Steve Coogan's Phineas Fogg was much better at first than David Niven's. But quickly, the movie it really starts to feel like a product of its time. It feels like a 2000s movie.
Jackie Chan feels way weirdly used.
I mean, I understand they want something that can kind of mimic what Cantinflas did in the original, but they obviously changed maybe the ethnicity of the character and just what they did.
The whole backstory.
Yeah, it doesn't really work as well. But I don't want to spoil anymore, so we'll drop a spoiler bomb. We'll do that because we're gonna spoil the heck out of this movie. Critiques here.
Yeah, I think for pretty much the whole movie, I thought the humor actually ended up finding itself later once you kind of adjust your expectations. I found in the beginning, I felt the most like it was an early 2000s, like, okay, this is pretty bad. But then I will give it credit, by the third act, I was laughing a bit at things and, like, jokingly cheering at the screen when the plane takes off from the ship that they built out of the same material. Somehow the boat still floats. We're not going to question that. There's, like, just a lot of stuff that is kind of fun. Also a ton of cameos in this one. For maybe the worst, I don't think any of the cameos were like amazing. But yeah, I mean, this movie does a couple of things better, but it still fails in the execution of it, similar to the first one. It just cannot pull off a good movie.
Yeah, I think what it really nails is it nails the aesthetic. It nails what I want a Jules Verne movie to look like. From the way that the technology looks that the inventor creates, like the outfit that Jackie Chan wears in the beginning, looks like something straight out of Jules Verne. And I think they did take a lot of inspiration either from this movie or took inspiration from I believe it is the French and Tokyo Disney Sea parks that have the Jules Verne aesthetic in them. And kind of
I've been on 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
So there's definitely a crossover of some of the aesthetics.
Very similar, yeah.
So that's really nice to see,
particularly in his machining, like
yes.
in his inventive.
That's what I'm going for, and I really appreciate that. And I think that, like I said, Steve Coogan is a much better pick as Phineas Fogg. I feel like he fits the inventor role better. He kind of feels a bit more cartoony than I would expect a Jules Verne character to be, but was still a welcome inclusion. Jackie Chan is probably the weirdest choice in this movie.
Well, he produced it.
Yeah, which, I mean, Disney probably loaded his pockets with something. But I think it's not because of him that I think this movie doesn't work as well. I think it's because of his story. Because of his story, we get the inclusion of a needless, pointless villain. I think it's the Chinese general person.
The lady, yeah.
Which is just like, why do we need this? This is supposed to be about seeing the world, not having a fight. And because of Jackie Chan's in it, we get a lot of fight scenes, which Jackie Chan fight scenes are always great. They're always a lot of fun.
The stunts are really good. Yeah.
They're really great, but it doesn't feel like a Jules Verne adaptation. It just feels like a 2000s movie meant to, entertain kids like me who were in 4th grade, 5th grade at the time.
Yeah. No, 100%.
But also, Jim Broadbent as the scientist leader guild guy is horrible. And I love Jim. We just saw him in Paddington. And he's great in Paddington. He's horrible here. Like, maybe it's just the way it's written.
Yeah, I think that's what it is, because it just doesn't translate to, like, it just sounds weird every time. One part I did like, though, is when Jackie Chan figures out that all the scientists pass information without questioning it. So at first they say, like, I think the man that robbed a bank, I heard it was a Chinese man. And then he starts whispering, he goes like, well, I heard it was an Irish man.
It was a Norwegian. Yeah.
And then he just gets super specific. Like they start saying, like, I heard it was a Norwegian with a large nose and small feet. And
he just sits there like, just smiling. Like it's great. But there's like the little moments like those are just overshadowed by this just wave of complete just mediocrity. This feels like the movie that would have gone straight to DVD back in the day and not even gone to theaters, and it didn't. Theatrical.
Yeah, I saw it in theaters.
I'm sorry for your childhood, posthumously.
Well, but again, like you said, like at the age that I was, this was a pretty fun movie. Like, it's quirky. It was out at the time when these kind of movies were in. It feels fun. Like, when you look back, you can tell that it's got like a fun energy to it. It just doesn't hold up, I think, is the problem. Like, it just feels outdated now.
It feels outdated. It just doesn't feel as sincere. Like, the original has a sincerity to it. It's trying to be a faithful version of the book. And it's missing here. You get it aesthetically, but you don't get it character-wise. You don't get it writing-wise. Having the French artist character is pointless. Like, he's supposed to meet someone along the way. It's not supposed to be someone he just picks up in London.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I wanted to see the world. No, that you meet her later.
I also thought there was a ton of weird stuff that they just kind of threw in that felt peppered, like the whole Arnold Schwarzenegger cameo, where he wants to take the French artist as like one of his 7 brides, and it's just filler like that I feel like I just don't need it. Like, I want to see the world. I don't want to see you have to deal in like a little hot tub with these people. It was just really weird.
It doesn't work. It purely just does not work as much as the original. I think you could show this to kids, and I think they'd be fine. I think, I think
it's a passive watch.
It's a passive family watch. Yeah, definitely. But I think when when you look at it through a more critical lens, like I think we are, it doesn't hold up. It's a hot air balloon that doesn't take off. I can tell you that.
Yeah. I will say again though, the stunts, if you're into stunt work and like just Jackie Chan's work in general, those do hold up. The stunt work and the fights in this movie, which there are plenty of, are super fun. There's some really cool like prop work in the fights. There's some really cool like falling stuff. There was one fall that actually made me almost spit out my water, and it's not Jackie Chan's. It's when they're taking off in the hot air balloon and he's like chasing the rope, and he takes the lady's bag, and then they're running and she falls over a ledge into an alleyway, and straight up, even if it's a stunt, dude, she broke something. Like, she hits like neck first into the ground, and I don't care if there's padding. I was sitting there like just kind of hanging out watching, and I went, oh my god,
she's dead.
Because like all the other guys chasing fell and did the stunt also, and she just like eats it so hard. It was crazy.
I'd love to have that show up on the Corridor Crew like stunt series that they do.
I'd love for the guy to go, yeah, there was no padding. She just
went for it. We didn't even pay her to do it. She just jumped off the building.
8-foot drop onto cobblestone, face first.
It's so bad. It's like the we had talked about this recently off podcast when we were just hanging out, but like back from iCarly, that classic meme of Gibby falling from the ceiling. Like, his stunt person broke ribs because he just fell onto the ground, and that's just what I think of when I see that. I just see this woman flying off of into an alleyway, and he's like, Gibby! But I got nothing else to say. I think this movie is pretty bad. It's inoffensive. It's not offensively bad, but it's just not what you're looking for in terms of like a good version of the book. I mean, I would rather show people the original, like in a heartbeat, even though it's not necessarily or nearly as good.
But I think what it leads to is that like neither of these need to be watched. Like, I think that's the vibe. Like, unless you're going for some purpose, both are skips in my book.
Yeah, the only justification is for the original one is if you're doing an Oscar binge, and for the remake or the newer version, if you're on a Jackie Chan binge. Like, that's it.
That's it.
But, Adrian, what are your final thoughts? What's the score for Around the World in 80 Days from 2004?
Final thoughts, I think it's worth a skip. I don't think you need to watch it. I don't think you should show your kids this, because if they end up really liking it, you have to deal with really bad quotes all the time.
And rewatch
you'll
this.
have to watch it. Yeah, and you'll have to rewatch it a bunch of times, which it's not worth. And I don't want to see this show up on any charts in a resurgence. Yeah, just bad all the way around. Really tries some new stuff. Has a slightly, arguably more like interesting beginning plot that just doesn't go anywhere, or at least doesn't like contribute anything to the overall story in a way that you might think it would. So because of that, I gave this movie a 27.
27. Alrighty. I said that while the film starts more interestingly than the original, the addition of fight scenes and comical villains underpins the times in which the movie was made. And so in doing that, it feels more dated and insincere of an adaptation than the original. But there are a couple of decent things, like the stunts, like we said. Steve Coogan is actually tolerable as the main character. So because of that, I can't give it a horrible score. I did give it a 22, though. So right around the same as you.
Yeah, feels about right.
But that's going to bring us to an end for this episode. Next week, we have a rewatchable coming up. We're going to be rewatching another Best Picture winner. We're watching Gladiator next week, which is the perennial cable TV favorite that was always rebroadcast. I'm very interested to see if you can catch any of the mistakes that are in the movie, the notable mistakes.
Like that it was made? I'm just kidding. I have no idea if it's good or bad.
Have you not seen Gladiator?
No.
Then it's not a rewatchable. We gotta reschedule.
No, you know what I'm thinking of? I'm thinking of Troy. I have seen Gladiator.
Gladiator's with Russell Crowe.
Yeah, I was thinking of Brad Pitt.
Okay.
I've not seen Troy.
That was close. We almost had to reschedule on the podcast. But that's going to be coming up next week. Adrian, if anyone wants to follow us online and figure out what the hell we're doing, where can they do that?
The Drive Back Podcast, wherever you please. If you're watching our faces on YouTube, go ahead and smash the like button, subscribe, hit the bell. We post every Monday, but here exclusively on YouTube, you will get extra content. Everywhere else for those Monday episodes in podcast form, on any podcasting app, the Drive Back Podcast.
That is absolutely correct. So we know what's going on next week. We can't wait to see you then. We love you so much. We'll see you next time here on The Drive Back. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Drive Back. Make sure to be on the lookout for new episodes every Monday, and make sure to follow us on social media.